I am wearing my face mask today. These masks I wear in respect of my people. I recognise and acknowledge the sovereignty of the Gadigal people on whose lands many of you are today. I recognise and acknowledge the Bidjigal people on whose lands I sit today. I recognise and acknowledge my own people, Bigambul, Yawallyi, and Gamillaraay. Thank you for all joining us today in this very important discussion.
My name's Nick Dean, and I'm one of the organisers of Raising Peace. I'd just like to say a couple of housekeeping things first of all. Please keep yourselves on mute all the time, and there may be time for questions towards the end, but please put your questions into the chat system at the bottom of the screen. So here we are, approaching the end of Raising Peace. It's been a very exciting journey for the many people involved. For me, it began back in 2019 when I joined Rita Worley and Margot Pearson, who'd already been discussing the idea that eventually developed into the event that we've all been experiencing. I wrote to them around that time saying, I'm sure we can get something good going. And that was an honest hope back then. We had no idea that it would reach the scale that it has. I feel a bit like a small bird whose nest has been invaded or raided by a cuckoo. The resultant offspring was unexpectedly large, much bigger than expected. And it was also of remarkable quality. We attracted some very influential names, and our timing was extraordinarily lucky. Because at short notice, because events were moving very swiftly, we managed to include a session about Afghanistan. And then it was very topical at that time. And then we were overtaken by the now infamous announcement that Australia will be part of AUKUS and obtaining nuclear-powered submarines. I've little doubt that this unexpected and worrying announcement enlarged our audience because its probable implications for peace and the size of the audience indicates once again that there is a great level of support for the cause of peace in the wider community. The people out there want peace above all. Many are upset about Australia's advancing militarisation. Many, like me, fear that we're being led down a path that has war at its end. I'm leaving the festival still deeply concerned about the course on which this nation is headed, but more than ever motivated to do whatever I can to change it. And most importantly, I'm coming away with a very warm sense of being part of a community that has its heart in the right place, that wants the world to be more peaceful. So we're about to have the last event of this year's Raising Peace. And when I say it like that, I reveal the fact that I'm convinced that more events and activities that further the cause will follow, because the task of getting Australia onto a peaceful path is an important one, and it is becoming an urgent one. So now it's my pleasure to introduce to you our moderator for this final formal session. She's Dr. Susan Banki, a senior lecturer from the Department of Sociology within the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences at Sydney University. Dr. Banki's area of special interest is in the legal and political context surrounding international human rights violations. So she's ideally suited for the role that we have invited her to assume for today. So come to the screen, Dr. Susan Banki.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Nick, and thank you to the organizers of Raising Peace. I regret that I have not been able to deeply engage with every single session, but as you pointed out, sadly, the topicality of so much of this conference workshop set of seminars has been incredibly relevant given the conflicts that we see today and the aftermaths that we see sort of pouring out of them, from Afghanistan to AUKUS. We could do we could have found a no more relevant set of topics. Sadly, however, I think even if Raising Peace had happened 1 month down the track or 10 months ago, whenever it was, there are topical issues to be found everywhere. It is my great pleasure to introduce this illustrious panel, terrific group of activists and thinkers who are going to just close out this conference with some final thoughts. I have some thoughts and some questions for the panel, but I also want to encourage our audience, our very large audience, to put your questions in the chat as we move forward for the next hour. Dr. Marty Branagan, and I'm going to let whoever is in the tech behind be highlighting people. Oh, good. You guys are behind that. Is a long-term activist and an artist and a senior lecturer in peace studies at the University of New England. He researches nonviolence, World War II, artistic activism, and women in environmental movements. And his most recent publication is the novel Locked On. Professor Clinton Fernandez, I hope he is with us. When I last checked, I didn't see him. I'm not sure if he's there. So maybe I'll hold off on introducing him to make sure he's coming on. We'll just keep moving in that case. Barbara Flick already gave our marvelous introduction. She's a 70-year-old elder. I'm very worried about getting the nation wrong, but I will try Yawallyi. How did I do, Barb? Good enough? Okay. She's been a member of the Alice Springs Peace Group, and she's been affiliated with MAPW in Adelaide. She served on the federal government's National Consultative Committee on Peace and Disarmament. Welcome. Dr. Ann Noonan is also with us. She is a psychiatrist and a psychoanalyst. She works in Sydney and in remote communities in Central Australia, and she's been involved in anti-war movements for many years. Her current commitments include the promotion of international humanitarian law as the Medical Association for Prevention of War's representative with the International Committee of the Red Cross, and participation in the Australian West Papua Association. Welcome, Anne. We have Eva Rodriguez Riestra, who is an arts administrator, a curator, and a researcher with a background in architecture, urban design, and art history. She is dedicated to spatial justice and interested in the role that art, culture, and creative practices can play in making cities inclusive, livable, accessible, and sustainable. She is one of the founding members of Architects for Peace, a humanitarian not-for-profit organization that was established in 2003. And that certainly explains her interest in spatial justice. More recently, Eva has been part of a working group bringing together peace-focused collections, galleries, and trails to establish the Australian Network of Museums for Peace. So welcome, Eva. And finally, we have Carl Suen, who is a young men's leader of Soka Gakkai International Australia, which is a lay Buddhist organization dedicated to promoting peace through culture and education. He's been a part of Australia's for Nuclear Disarmament, and he helps to organize, and as part of that, helps to organize the annual Hiroshima Day event in Melbourne. He's a part of the organizing committee for the Intercultural Youth Dialogue in Victoria in Melbourne. And I am really pleased to see all of you there. I don't know whether Clinton has joined us, but I'm thinking not, because I think I would have gotten something in the chat that would have told me so. So I regret that. Maybe he'll be joining us a little bit later. Welcome to this terrific panel after so many days of deep thinking, of hope, of the frustration of topical events. So I wanted to start by asking, particularly Ava and Carl, but really happy to hear from all of you on this. As we heard in many sessions, but especially in the keynote address by Costa Rica's Ambassador Vargas, we know that peace takes work. And we also know that it's not an end point. It's, in fact, an ongoing process. We don't sort of get to peace and there it is, and then we all celebrate and go home and everything's okay. If we understand the world that we are in today, we know that we have to continue to make adjustments to how we live our own lives and make the lives of others more peaceful. So I wanted to ask what you see as the work that is needed for the future of the peace movement, specifically here in Australia. Maybe we'll start that with Ava.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you to everyone involved in organising this amazing festival. I'd like to start my response by also acknowledging the traditional owners and custodians of unceded Gakkai country where I am today. I recognise their continuing connection to land, water and community, and pay my respect to the elders past, present and emerging. I think for us in Australia, the first step in the work for peace is acknowledgement of where we are and what injustices have been perpetrated to get us here. It's important that we acknowledge that colonial structures and policies remain in place today, and that we recognise the ongoing struggles of First Nations people in challenging and dismantling these structures. The struggle to seek justice and to remember and address these nations' past is ongoing and is a necessary requirement for individual and for collective healing. I like how you asked the question in terms of peace as an ongoing process rather than a goal. And I think peace is really interesting. I think all humans have an innate understanding of what it is, and I would bet that all humans have an innate desire for peace, but as we all know, it's not easy and it's not simple. It's difficult to define, and unfortunately it's very difficult to achieve. And it's woven with social and environmental justice, with equality, inclusion, with human and non-human rights. And peace, it's not the absence of conflict, nor is it the absence of difference, nor the absence of passion. And I think after 20 or so years involved in peace advocacy and activism, I'm probably only at the beginning of being able to answer this question a little bit. I think for this discussion, and just to be brief, I thought of three things that are essential to the work of peace. And the first one is to question the status quo, acknowledging inequalities and injustices and trying to understand how they come about. I think the second one is like a mindfulness or an awareness of peace, and kind of including peace in your daily toolkit. And finally, it's just in doing what you can. So unfortunately for us in Australia in September 2021, the first step is all too easy. So in addition to the issues of Indigenous recognition, respect, reconciliation and reparation, we're faced with a general growing inequality, exclusion, with social injustices, environmental devastation, climate crisis, and in Australia, the reframing of the national character to be less generous and less kind, less tolerant, and less capable of negotiating and reaching agreement. So, we have our work cut out for us. The second step could be simple. I think in almost any interaction, unless all of the participants have peace as a value in front of their minds, it tends to fall by the wayside. So everything that we can do to bring peace to the table through dialogue, education, by living example is important and relevant work. And the third thing is kind of also easy. At a given moment in time, each of us has a set of skills and talents and relationships, responsibilities, desires, and at any given moment in time, we can all do something in the work for peace. And it can be a small secret kindness, or it can be starting an organisation that has international reach, just seeking like-minded people, protesting, advocating, protecting, or, you know, creating a wonderful festival such as this one.
Ava, that's lovely. And I love how you highlighted something that I think has been present throughout the conference, which is just the many intersectionalities of how peace can be achieved. Now, that can feel very, very overwhelming, but I love the way that you've put this forward as a way of saying, even if you just do the one small thing, that could potentially have these positive externalities that can touch any one of those elements of peace. So that was lovely. Thank you. Carl, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the kind of work that it takes to achieve peace.
Thank you, Susan, and thanks, Eva, for that really wonderful thoughts and your explanation around how I think this work that we need to do going forward. I also concur that, you know, a lot of what we see in today's media and news reports, you know, is very concerning, you know, COVID-19, climate change, nuclear disarmament, indigenous rights. I think seeing all these, what can seem like doom and gloom in the news as from a younger person's perspective, I think a lot of times it's quite tempting to give into these feelings of hopelessness or powerlessness. And also another tendency is, you know, to dominate others who don't agree with us, or to judge others and to label others. And in terms of the work I feel we need to do, I'd approach it in two senses. The first one is on a personal front, on a personal work. As a practicing Buddhist in SGI and Nichiren Buddhism, there is a concept that we strive to practice every day called human revolution. And when we talk about revolutions, we think about change, right? We think about very drastic changes. And so from a humanities perspective or a personal perspective, this inner transformation of our negative tendencies that denies the dignity of life, and while we work on challenging ourselves, you know, to bring forth this limitless creative force from within us to contribute to our communities. For me, it's a really intense endeavor, because it is an engagement that we must have to articulate this force to break through ourselves, our limited view of life, in order to tap into this wellspring of energy. And I'd like to quote Dr. Daisaku Ikeda, who is our third president of SGI, who is also a poet, an author, and also a peace builder. He says that our task is to establish a firm inner world, a robust sense of self that will not be swayed or shaken by the most trying circumstances or pressing adversity. Only when our efforts to reform society have as their point of departure the reformation of the inner life, which is human revolution, will they lead us with certainty to a world of lasting peace and true human security. So I really draw on Eva's last point around this personal work that we can do. And the second one is, for me, the work we can do in the community. For me, being part of an incredibly supportive Buddhist community, and also in my life, in my family, and in my workplace, I think seeking out allies and like-minded people within the community and work together towards peace is very important. I feel that, you know, having role models and mentors that I can look up to, that we can learn from, and at the same time, you know, they share with me that, you know, they are very inspired and also very, very refreshed by young people's creativity and also passion. And so this symbiotic relationship of learning from each other and working together is a very powerful way of, you know, creating this future for peace in Australia. And I'm sure everyone's heard of this story or this analogy of a single stick can be broken very easily, but a big bunch that's put together, it's very difficult to break apart. So I feel that, you know, this work of building this community together takes a lot of time and effort, but I feel is critical to the future of peace movement in Australia.
That's beautiful, Carl. I mean, parts of what you described, the work of sort of accepting everyone, the work of being able to remain not indifferent to, but in some way not furious at those with whom we disagree, to not express intolerance is indeed very hard work. But you've also provided us an idea of the tools that we might use in order to move in that direction, a sense of community, for example. So thank you to both of you. I'm going to move on to the next question, unless our panelists are really eager to jump in, just because we have some other things that we wanted to talk about, and I do want to make sure that we get to some other questions. And once again, we do have time for the audience to ask questions as well, if we like. So this question I'll ask specifically to Anne and to Barb. Striving for peace may seem like a universal goal, but we know that right now, from the panels that we've talked about and from this recent situation that we have here in Australia, achieving peace, the challenges to achieving peace in Australia are rather specific. So Anne and Barbara, I'd love to hear your thoughts about what it means to achieve peace in Australia. Ava already referred to it, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. Anne, can we start with you?
Yes, thanks very much. And thanks very much for your introductions. I didn't think I had much to say after Eve and Carl. But, again, what is peace? That is a big question, because I don't think it is always being a Gandhi-like approach, personally speaking. I think it's outrage by injustice, which is one of the things that pushes me along. So I think you have to look at that. I think you have to educate yourself as much as possible. I think you've got to be prepared to be informed by other people who know their own business better than we do. I think particularly in Australia, we've got to connect with the Asia Pacific and, the ideas of progressive internationalism, which that Greek bloke is talking about. They make a lot of sense. Yeah. And particularly I think it's good to work in your own area. And the area I feel most outraged by is prisoners' health, and particularly Indigenous prisoners, because they get an even worse go than ordinary prisoners. So I don't think we can imagine Australia can be a just country till a lot of inequality is fixed up. So.
Thank you, Anne. And once again, I see that Ava and Anne are tying in a lot of the similar sort of themes when we think about some of the injustices that we see in Australia that need to be remedied for us to have a true version of peace. It specifically mentioned that issue of inequality, and I appreciate
that. And sort of obscurantism, we are being more and more obscured from what's going on. We're being, there's a lot of concealment, corruption, nastiness going on. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Barb, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, and specifically if you wanted to make some commentary on AUKUS, that I think we'd be really interested to hear. That even though we had a panel that actually several of the panels have touched on it, but would love to hear your thoughts also.
Well, my father used to tell us that in 1770, it was like a big, what we call a whirlwind, hit our country, which before then was like a big giant jigsaw puzzle where all the pieces fitted together, where social behaviour, where laws, where all religion, all of the things that make people a society were fitted together perfectly. And this burly wind came from across the other side of the world and blew it into the sky. And that today we're still trying to put those pieces back together again. This country has been built on lies from the very beginning. When Cook planted his flag just down behind me here at Kamai, you might call Botany Bay, and he stuck a flag in the ground and declared that he was claiming this land for the King of Britain. And what a ridiculous notion that is. Does that make me an Australian? I think not. You know, I have been a member of my ancestors for tens of thousands of years. And you stick a flag in the ground does not make me, and I'm confused about what an Australian is, I must say. I don't know. This destruction has not gone on very long for us. I was born 163 years after Philip sailed his boat up here, Yarra Bay. My great Bargi, my word for grandmother, Susan, was born 66 years after Philip arrived. Only 66 years. She and her people held off the settlers, the so-called settlers in Bigambul country for many years. They worked out pretty quickly that to try and move the settlers off their country, they would use economic guerrilla warfare. So they killed their cattle. Not to eat, they never took them. They kept killing the cattle. And what happened was that for 3 years, all of those people went away until the government introduced the native police, who went back, and there's a select committee report that tells of how they went out there and slaughtered a lot of our Bigambul people. Population went from around 3,000 to 300 in a very short space of time. But we still survive and we know the story. It's part of my family history. We tell it to our grandchildren and great-grandchildren. My Granny Ada Woods lived with us until she died. Granny Ada was born 73 years only after Philip sailed up the Yarra. And I was 14 years old when she died. I knew this old woman. Her death certificate claims that she was 104, but we believe she was 108 when she died. I knew her. I lived with her. I helped look after her. My dada, my grandfather, Mick Flick, he was born 102 years after Philip sailed up here, and I was 12 years old when he died. He enlisted in the First World War. Sense of adventure? I don't know, but he did. And he served in France on the Western Front. He had a different experience. He wasn't just a blackfellow anymore with all those connotations, but he was a comrade. He was a brother. And he fought alongside many others. But when he came back to this country, he was denied access to the RSL clubs, which he valued because he could be with people who shared the same experiences with me, and we know that's healing. On Anzac days, he couldn't have a beer with them. and share stories, he had to be served out of the window at the back. His children, my father and my father's siblings, were excluded from the local schools. So my generation was the first that went to school where I come from. So this is not old history. This is not old history. There has been so much pain. There have been mass murders. Mass murders. Look at the Brewarrina local government website. And they proclaim the fact that over 400 men, women, and children were murdered by white men on horseback, not only with rifles, but with swords that slashed the heads of babies, slashed the bodies of women trying to escape with their children, and left them where their bones still lie today. In the 1980s, I worked in the western half of New South Wales, and I was still with the local Walgans, the aunties, taking skeletons out of their museums. They were there for the tourists. Where national parks people were still dusting off, sweeping off the skeletons of babies so the tourists could see them. It's in the 1980s. Where bulldozers were still making new roads through our burial grounds and exposing the skeletons of many of our family. And it wasn't until we threatened the minister responsible that we would have him charged under the section of the Crimes Act that talked about interfering with human remains that the grader driver left that afternoon. There is so much pain that we still feel about what happened to us. There is so much pain about the truth telling that has never been told in this country. I was in a taxi recently with my husband, and the taxi driver from Bangladesh said to us, "Oh, you're Aboriginal, you people get everything for free." And I thought about how hard it is for us to even reconnect the way that we want to do with our own culture and traditions on the East Coast. Because our grandparents didn't want to talk about it. The destruction of our places happened as early as 1938. 84 carved trees marked out a bora ground just outside of the place that I came from. Because the anthropologists and several universities decided they need to cut down those trees and preserve them. We've lost them. My grandfather, Pop Flick, went out and witnessed this event. That's all he could do, was to witness it. Now, Pop, like my other ancestors, Pop died in 1965, before the 67 referendum. He succumbed to the gas in his lungs from the trenches in France. He was dearly beloved by all his family. All he got was 6 foot of dirt over him. That was all the land he got back from the whole of his tribal lands. So I'm not a supporter of the Uluru Statement. There's too much unfinished business. I don't think it's going to make much of a difference to us if there's an advisory committee in Parliament that might have some say about the ongoing failed policies of governments. Integration, discrimination, self-determination, rubbish, 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 and it will go on. I don't believe that all of our people have been consulted about this move. A referendum? We're 3% of the population. We're going to ask the majority of people, most of them who haven't even been born in this country, to vote on whether or not we should have a treaty and what that treaty should look like. We've never operated that way. Nobody can speak for your country except yourself. Other people can't speak for me. Gadigal people can't speak for me. Nobody else can speak for you. And that belief and law has survived 60 to 100,000 years. So there's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of education. Don't you just become so confused when there's still a debate in schools whether or not we should call the invasion of this country settlement. Lies after lies after lies after lies, like a huge spider web, has been woven into what the international community and the Australian community accept as truths. They're not truths. It's a long road to go, and it's only the beginning. And I, for one, don't want to rush into any kind of debate about the Uluru Statement, because I think it's what the government wants. Yeah, put them in the Constitution, you know. Let's do that. What change is that going to make for my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren? Have an advisory committee in Parliament. No negotiations, no diplomacy, no understanding. Who's gonna advise on my behalf? Don't set up a team of people to advise on my behalf. You want to talk to Yawallyi people, you go talk to Yawallyi people. You want to talk to Gamillaraay people, you go sit down and talk with them. Look at the destruction of our river. That's a vein. That's the blood that runs through our veins. 200 years, blink of an eyelid. The river's dry. When it's not dry, it's full of carp. We can't even eat our own foods anymore. So I don't know what the answers are, or what the resolution in our country is, but it's about time we started talking seriously about this relationship. Thank you, Susan.
Barb, I want to thank you for being trustful of this community in this room to tell these painful stories. I think I speak for everyone on this Zoom room when we say that we are in solidarity with you and feel your sense of despair. I share it. I thank you for being so open in your communication. You have expressed very clearly how long the road is to justice and to peace, and how particularly riddled it has been for the populations here in Australia. So thank you to that. Thank you so much. I'm gonna move, not really on. I think we keep what you've said in the back of our mind, in the front of our mind actually, but I did want to sort of make sure that we get to talk a little bit as well to our other speakers. Maybe I'll turn to Marty next and ask you, with your activist background, your artist background, the combination of those two, what you think might be needed for an effective peace campaign, and any specific examples that might be useful.
Yeah, thanks, Susan, and everyone. First up, want to acknowledge that I'm speaking from Anawan Aboriginal land, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And I would note that Aboriginal people have lived in relative ecological peace, particularly over the last 5,000 years with this country, but also in a great deal of social peace. They had friendships with the people in the islands to the east and the north of Australia. They didn't live in this constant fear of invasion from those places. They had good relationships with them. So I think we have a great deal to learn from people such as Auntie Barb about peace, whether it's ecological peace or cultural peace, positive peace, the whole ranges of peace that are all interconnected. And I also want to acknowledge all the organisers of this fantastic festival. Just wonderful to hear such a range of excellent speakers in the couple of sessions that I was able to attend. Unfortunately, I've been away at an environmental blockade on the mid-north coast where primarily young people, but also guided by some older activists, are engaging in climate action, direct climate action. So I think we can learn a lot from environmental movements in the peace movement and vice versa. In fact, a lot of people are involved in both the eco-pax movement. And I think that's really important at the moment with the nuclear powered submarines. I think there's a great opportunity to draw these two groups together, plus Indigenous and traditional owners, a whole range of people together, as is happening at this festival. I think one example of a great environmental campaign that we can learn from is the Bentley blockade against coal seam gas in the Northern Rivers near Lismore. And they engaged in very strong concerted action. It wasn't like the peace marches of 2003 against the Iraq invasion, which was just over a weekend. It was the biggest set of rallies ever, which was fantastic, but it didn't go on from that weekend. Whereas around the Lismore region, they built up through door knocking, through lobbying, through building up a giant coalition, but they also had a very strong physical focus on the land, on the country, with the traditional owners. So they set up blockades there where people were cemented and chained into the ground or were up in tripods. And at one point, the state government, in their infinite wisdom, were going to bring in 800 riot police from Sydney to clear this blockade. And the police themselves said, don't do this. Please don't do this. This is a very, very strong community united against this desecration of sacred land and water. We've been speaking with the community. The Rural Fire Brigade won't give us their headquarters for us to set up there. The motels won't accommodate us. The caterers won't provide food for us. No one is going to cooperate with us. And in the end, the state government backed down. They actually listened to the 93% of the community that did not want coal seam gas. And it was a major success there. So it was, I think, a great example of very widespread community non-cooperation. And I think one lesson we can learn from that is the strength of concerted, decentralised actions. And these included shareholder activism of people going along to the corporation to lobby them to get involved in their meetings, but also divesting and making a great deal of fuss about that. And I think we could do that a little bit more in the peace movement. I'd be interested to see if people maybe could put their virtual hand up, if you use those reactions down the bottom, if you have divested from the big four banks, the Commonwealth, ANZ, Westpac, and NAB, and have moved your money across to one of the more ethical banks, or whether you've moved your money from the super funds that are engaged in fossil fuel and weapons and so on, or you've moved it across to groups like Future Super. Whether you've moved your money from the fossil fuel power companies or whether you've moved to groups like Future Super, Power Shop, which is 100% renewable energy. So there are things we can do at international scale, like the campaign against nuclear weapons, which has been a fabulous story, but we can also do things individually in our own lives.
Marty, that was terrific, and it actually speaks to one of the questions, or part of it, when you talked about the Bentley blockade. That responds a little bit to a question that we had in the chat about the role of youth, because the person, Tim, pointed out that there's a lot of seniors on this call. I happily accept myself from that. I'm young at heart, even if old in body. But I love what you had to say. Before I move on, I was wondering whether you wanted to just say a few words, and maybe the other speakers want to jump on with this as well, is the role of art, because I see that we have some real creatives among this panel, and what can art do? How is it transformative?
Yeah, I think the arts are absolutely vital. I think we could bring a lot more humour and more celebration of the great stories that go on all the time. As panellist Louise Tarrant pointed out on the International Day of Peace, there's a lot of terrible, terrible stuff going on, but at the same time, there's always lots of really, really good stuff. And we don't hear about this much on the news. So partly I think it's about the narratives we have. That what are the stories we tell? Are they going to just add to people's depression and feelings of powerlessness? Or are they going to empower them so that they feel motivated to act? Even if it's the small things that Eva talks about, or the the inner peace that Carl was speaking about. I think positivity and solutions-based things that the arts and creativity can bring, particularly when it's very decentralised, when small groups get together. You don't all have to work in one huge mass movement. You can work in small groups, and the creativity there, the synergies are just extraordinary. And I've just been so motivated by seeing these young people at these environmental blockades. Just so creative and passionate and full of climate fear, anxiety, but going out and doing their little bit, whether it's just doing the dishes at a camp. That sort of thing adds so much to the general mix.
And those of us with children can tell you that doing dishes is indeed work, because we spend a lot of time doing it. I shouldn't make light, because you've really pointed out the many ways in which youth can participate and how they get involved. So thank you for that. And I wanted to return to you if you wanted to just offer some thoughts on specifics of how we move forward with peace campaigns.
I can think of ongoing stuff. Nick gave Margot a little plug. Margot was one of the ones that kept this Raising Peace going. There was a thing that happened in 1986. I'm giving women a plug now. Women's International League for Peace and Freedom had a thing called the Great Peace Journey. And women went from Sweden to all over the world, including Australia, asking 5 questions on peace and justice. And at that time, our then Prime Minister said yes. That was good. America didn't say yes, Russia did. Anyway, that's an ongoing thing that keeps happening. And on that trip, there was a West Papuan who was a political refugee who lived in Sweden, and he came out, and I think together with West Papuans who had left earlier and were integral in the initial formation of the nuclear-free and independent Pacific, that is really what started the West Papua support stuff happening in Australia. And with CPACs, good on you, Wendy. So it's an ongoing thing. And I think it's a bit like what Barb's saying with Indigenous people. All we can do is support people who know their own business. And that's what we've done with West Papua. West Papua's now got a government in exile. They've got a terrific foreign policy, which includes getting Pacific people who are going to be drowned to be able to come over to PNG and West Papua if they ever get a bit of autonomy. So, you know, it's not a concise one, but in my opinion, it's an ongoing one. Okay.
Thank you so much, Anne. Okay, I think we'll move along. Oh, sorry, did someone else want to say something? Marty, did you want to say something? Okay, sorry. I heard a breath. This one I think is well, I have here Barb and Marty, but really happy to hear from anyone. What you see as the most important priorities for peace advocates in this country today, whether young or old.
Well, I think that one of the most dangerous things to happen with this new AUKUS relationship and the nuclear subs being posted down here is that a lot of our people are going to be exposed to first strike actions. It was something that we fought against when I lived in Alice Springs and was a member of the Alice Springs Peace Group in the 1980s. You know, these are first strike targets. And the CIA base and the other US bases around Australia are just exposing us. And there doesn't seem to be any discussion about how that will be managed by the government. You know, this seems to be, you know, a few of the boys got together and made this deal, and without any real thought to consequences and how it might impact ordinary people and their lives. And I don't think there's any need for it. Why is there now this move to have more nuclear submarines and articles of war, you know? No, everybody knows that you can't win a war. The Americans should have learned it after Vietnam. Afghanistan, Iraq, how many 3,000 poor souls lost in the Twin Towers? Over 800,000 Arabs lost in the Middle East. For what? What's the outcome? What have they achieved? How could that money have been spent? People crossing borders, trying to escape. Children dying along the way. Sleeping in any sort of shelter they can do. Being pushed back. Being pushed back by the countries that they're trying to get refuge from. You know, I really cannot understand this mentality. I cannot for the life of me understand how you think that engaging with nuclear warfare is going to do anybody any good, even though they might say it's a threat, it's a defensive mechanism, whatever. What happened to diplomacy? There's no such thing.
And like our other speakers, Barb, you have very powerfully drawn that relationship between the injustice done to Aboriginals and this sort of escalating and elevating of defense and the military. These are related issues. I think we keep coming back to that.
Yeah, that's John Hallam here. I can't help coming in on.
Sorry, John. You've now you're back. Okay, go ahead.
I can't help coming in on top of that and in support of what was just said, by just underlining that the number one immediate term threat to civilization worldwide remains the possibility of nuclear war. The likelihood of nuclear war is greater now than it has ever been, ever, including during the depths of the Cold War. And the AUKUS decision simply places a bloody big black line under that, underlines it, emphasizes it. We've been a nuclear target since the 1970s, but AUKUS makes it even more so, if you like. It reinforces doubly that we are a nuclear target, that the joint facilities, Pine Gap, etc., are nuclear targets, and that there is a good chance that Australian cities are nuclear targets.
Thank you, John. That's very sobering and a reminder. I wanted to just get back to our panelists, and then we will open it up to the questions of this really terrific audience. But I wanted to make sure that we returned to Eva and Carl for this penultimate question from me, which is in this conference, in this panel actually, but in the entire conference, we've seen many aspects of peace, and this includes reflective inner type of peace, efforts to achieve peace between and within different groups, such as in families or organizations, and between states or groups with different ideologies. Eva already talked about this a little, as did Carl, but I'd love to hear a little bit more of your thoughts on how you see these kind of three different aspects of peace as linked.
Thanks. I think the Peace Festival has been incredible. I think it's been also troubling and thought-provoking. This session, in a way, has been a microcosm of the whole festival, in a way, where, you know, we understand that there's these, you know, really, really difficult things that we're facing, but also there's a great community of people who want to make change. I don't know, I'm so grateful to be a part of the festival, and yeah, I'm not really sure how to answer that question about how these things are connected, other than by some observations that I think of things that have been in common. And I think, you know, everyone has shown care and agency and courage and resilience and respect and you know, imagination and a willingness to enter into discussion and, you know, to kind of hear difficult things, to have differences of opinion and to kind of navigate that. I think I'm really mindful of time, so I won't go into all of them, but I've been thinking about care a lot lately, and I've been looking at the ethics of care and looking at some ideas that started to get traction, I think like in the 70s with feminist thought, but now they're really coming to the fore in the context of climate crisis, and also, you know, we're beginning to understand a little bit about the notions of caring for country and how lucky we are in Australia to have, you know, this opportunity to kind of learn from First Nation people about care for country, and, you know, something that you know, is relevant across the world, but we have the people that know how to do it. Yeah, so I don't know, I think care is a really big thing, that, like peace, is a word that gets easily dismissed but has a lot behind it. And the act of care and is about stepping into someone else's shoes. I think it's the one of the definitions. And you know, that's one of the things that we've been learning through this festival. So you know,
That's lovely, Eva. Thank you.
Yeah, making peace work more visible makes peace more possible as well.
Lovely, Eva. Thank you so much. Carl. Oh, how about Carl? And then we'll let Anne have the last word on this, on my questions. And then I really want to make sure we get some time for the excellent questions of the audience. Is that all right? So Carl first and then Anne. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Susan. Yeah, I really want to echo what you shared, Eva, around care and this practice of putting ourselves in the other person's shoes. I think the Raising Peace Festival has been really incredible, and I'm really grateful for everyone who's been involved to organize this, because this is a demonstration of what dialogue looks like, you know, where we come together from very different backgrounds and learn from each other. We hear each other's stories, we hear each other's truths. And I've certainly learned so much from today's panel and all the different events over the past 2 weeks that I've been part of. And I feel that that's informed me in my views and also decision-making. And as I begin to understand others and become more educated in various issues, the type of actions that I would take comes from those information and those understanding. And I think the power of dialogue, you know, can't be underestimated. The more we engage in dialogue, the more we engage in friendship, you know, all these difficult and very challenging and complex issues that we face today, I feel can be worked through together as human beings, you know, because I feel that problems are created by human beings, so they can be solved by human beings, you know. And I think this fundamental respect for the person in front of us, the humanity in the front of us when we are conducting dialogue is really crucial, whether or not we agree with them or whether or not they agree with us, because that is, I think, the first step to peace, which is to never deny the humanity of the person in front of us. And I feel that it really starts from us. I'd like to share a quote, and then I'll close off from my end around this personal work that I was, this personal human revolution that I was referring to earlier. And again, this is a quote from Dr. Ikeda. He says that a great human revolution in just a single individual will help achieve a change in the destiny of a nation, and further can even enable a change in the destiny of all humankind. So for me, it starts with us. It starts with me. It starts with each person in this room. It starts with each person that we talk to, that we engage with everywhere around us, our family, our community. It starts with dialogue. It starts with friendship. It starts with care, as Eva mentioned earlier. Thanks, Susan.
That's a terrific terrific quote. And I see Nick has put in the chat that yes, we want to be respectful and tolerant, but we can also be robust in our opposition. So indeed, I think those do not have to be mutually exclusive. And I think, Carl, you've done a great job of tying together how those can be linked, the inner, as we might consider it, and the outer. So thank you. Anne.
Well, I think substantially I agree. It's about compassion, which is feeling with the other person. And the more you know about other people's backgrounds, the more you feel. I was just thinking of one of the presidents of the RSL who was a real right-winger, racist. Someone said something about a little girl. I think it was when the Vietnamese were coming. He says, oh, yeah, but not her, not that little kitty. So I think, again, it's that feeling. And just up in Alice Springs, I work in the Alice Springs prison. They're all Indigenous prisoners. One of the problems with Indigenous prisoners is that they're not looked at for mental health, depression, or PTSD in the way even white prisoners are. So they're sort of lumped. So there is a lot of suffering there. Because they've got each other, they're probably doing better than non-Indigenous prisoners. But also, I see Americans from the Pine Gap, and they are imprisoned in their own hell. And I'm doing online now because I can't go up there, but I have spoken to a couple of tortured Americans from Pine Gap since this nuclear submarine thing has come up. And I would say their paranoia has increased, their agitation, their anxiety. So it is, the common people that cop it. And I do think dialogue is the way to go. It's a bit of a race, isn't it, with everything else that's going on. I think young people with Zoom and their kind of new technologies, I feel very hopeful about that. So thanks.
I love that you ended on a note of hope. There's lots of questions that I see that have come through. I fear we will not get to all of them. Let me see what we've got here. We have quite a few, and we only have a few minutes. Let me see what I can find here. Sorry. Okay, well, we already had from Tim Ford, who asked kind of, maybe what I'll do, I have a great idea. We have 7 minutes left. What I'm going to do is read out the questions and then give each of you 1 minute to respond to what you think sounds, where you'd like to grab onto. Does that sound good from our panelists? Okay. So Tim has already asked about what we can do to get more of the younger generations actively involved. I think we've already heard some hopeful answers on that, but if that's what you'd like to speak to, happy to have it. Hannah Middleton has asked the challenges that we speak in environmental destruction. What can we do through peace to respond to the environmental crises on our planet? We have a question from Peter Murphy. Can we get more of a focus on the momentum towards war between the US and China, with Australia egging it on? Essentially, this is a foreign policy question about what we do about the increasing likelihood of aggression between China, the United States. We can fit Australia in there as well. Nick has asked if we think that all social problems or injustices are in fact interconnected. If so, is there a way to tackle them all at the same time rather than solving them one at a time? And this is back to Carl's point about whether you transform on an individual level first. Weiss has asked, or Vise, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, forgive me. There are many injustices in Australia that need to be addressed. Is there a way that we can unite in our peace work and not be fragmented and wedged by each other or the powers that want to silence us? How do we stop that fragmentation? I think that's a very important question, and one that I wish I had the answer to. Rodney has asked, can we all see ourselves as citizens of peace working together across the 5 levels of peace: personal, local, state, federal, international? Do we have to wait until next year to Zoom in together again? Can we meet on a quarterly basis? I will leave that to the organizers to answer. Wendy, when I turn things over to you in about 5 minutes. And a question for Barb from Philip. Is the Aboriginal tent embassy in Canberra still there? Is it making a difference for the Aboriginal situation?
Okay.
So how about if each of our speakers, I'll give you 1 minute. That means that we'll only go 1 minute past 3:15. And then if there's still some burning questions that are coming in, we can return to those. Why don't we start with, let me just say now what the order is so that you know. I am doing this purely just based on what I see on my screen. We'll go Marty, Carl, Barb, Ava, and Anne. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Susan. Some great questions, and I'd like to address Hannah's and another one about uniting. I think Hannah's right that the climate crisis is absolutely something we need to address. So we need this unity between environmentalists and peace activists, but I think also we need to look, as Anne said, at the people on the ground. And I think one way we can do that is through engaging with the unions. Some of you might have seen something by the Maritime Union of Australia, just very recently, a press release absolutely resisting this move to nuclear-powered submarines. It's a wonderful press release. You should be able to find it online. Really progressive. And I think we can work with unions like the MUA And I think we should work towards a general strike, maybe even an international strike, as was proposed 80 years ago, prior to World War I. Boycotts, divestments and sanctions that were proposed prior to World War II. All these tactics are out there available for us to use. And I think we need to look after the workers, talk to those workers on the ground, and ensure that there's a just transition for the people who are in the military or who are working in arms industries, so that they can move on to environmentally friendly jobs or non-violent peace forces internationally. And I'll just finally add that we'll be running hopefully quite a large summit in Armidale at the University of New England in December next year, which will be hopefully a big gathering of all those groups coming together. So you're all welcome, and I hope it will be as wonderfully organised as this Raising Peace has been.
Thanks, Marty. That's wonderful. Carl.
Yeah, thanks, Susan. I think I'll answer the one on the how do we attract younger people as opposed to all kinds of peace activities. I feel that, from my experience being part of a community that has a lot of trust and belief in young people, I feel that entrusting young people with the responsibility to take action, to plan events such as these, to speak at events such as these is a way to encourage and invite young people. Through young people's networks, social media, friendship groups, we invite friends along, and people ask, how was your weekend on Monday? And I tell them what I'm a part of or what I do, I suppose. And that's how we can attract young people. But critically, yes, at one of the Youth for Peace event yesterday, the same questions was raised, and I asked one of the youth facilitator, like, what has urged her to persevere in the face of all these difficulties and obstacles she meets along the way. And she said that it's because she has elders in the community that continuously support and believe in her. And so she continues, she persists, and she perseveres. So I feel that, and it doesn't just have to be older to younger people with younger people as well, I feel, to express hope to each other, to express belief in each other, and to invite each other to take action.
Back to community, which is a theme I think we've seen throughout this panel and certainly throughout the conference. The conference is creating community,
yes,
as it moves forward.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Carl. Barb.
I think that a lot of this work starts at a family level. I mean, certainly for our extended family, there's hundreds of us from, 3 different nations, and those of us who do write and research and put stories together, we try and meet once a year, except when this coronavirus hit, and we do teach our culture and our traditions and pass them on to the women's side and to the boys' side as well. And that's for them to really understand what happened to us on a personal level, This is, and I think that if more of us did that, that would be a great help. The 70s was so exciting, a decade, because of the relationship between, our mob and the unions and the women's organisations, and it was just full of energy, and we were setting up the legal services and the medical services, and all of these groups came together. Now, I think there's an opportunity. I just digress for one moment. I remember when Vincent Lingiari and the other people came down to talk to the unions, that we would go with buckets to the stop work meetings, and we would collect thousands of dollars in order to bring them down. So people were working together to make this possible. But we've got fracking on our lands, that's destroying the environment. Help us if it gets into the Artesian Basin and destroys what's been a water supply that's been built up over millions of years in one of the driest countries, if not the driest on the planet. The river systems, what do we do about it? I swear that if I was younger, I would blow up all the dams. You know, when I was a kid, the wet season came up north, the Diamantina, the Georgina, those rivers, they flowed down, they flushed out what you call the Darling River. It's really the Barker. That's the name, the Barker. Flushed those out. The song lines went all down the river. People carried those stories all the way down the river. The breeding sites, the women's sites, we can't go there anymore. No trespassing, private property, our country, our stories. We can't take our young girls there and talk about these breeding places, their women's sites. Can't do it. So what do we do about the, you know, the international, the countries that have so-called bought land in Australia, you know? What can we do about Cubby Station? How can we open up those gates and let the water through? You know, it seems that if we don't stand up and stand together, that we're going to lose this battle. We're going to lose it because the environment, the ecological damage that's been done already is almost at a state, but we have to once again get that energy back that we had in the 70s and 80s. You know, we have to get that energy back. We have to build those bridges again. We used to have all the entertainers, you know, Midnight Oil, Paul Kelly, all of them doing Rock Against Racism, you know. We had powerful connections in those days. So the unions were our best friends. The Communist Party, for heaven's sake, you know, did a lot of good work in Australia with Indigenous people, especially in the 20s, 30s and 40s in Western Australia. They were probably the strongest allies there. So we need to really start building bridges amongst ourselves, really developing strategies. We need to build a strategy that we can achieve over a period of time and then move on and build on our achievements. We need to stick together because those that sit in that big house in Canberra, what are they interested in? Having dinner with the President of the United States? Harping back to the British colonies, you know, we still keep that Union Jack in that flag, you know. Dare we say it should go? We do not dare. There's such an outcry. What for? Why are we still linked to them when we should be running our own agenda for our country and for the world?
Thank you, Barb. Ava, and then Anne. Ava, unmute.
You're a hard act to follow, Barb, so I'm not going to say very much other than really agree with you. I wanted to talk about young people because I think that is, you know, the only way we can get out of this, unfortunately. I've been teaching for a long time. I've been teaching in, you know, not in politics or anything like that, in architecture and built environment subjects where, you know, students are very idealistic and very passionate, but usually not very politically engaged. And this year was the first time in 20 years that the students are politically, you know, aware, articulate, and angry, you know. So I think about what Anne was talking about, you know, outrage, and so I think, you know, letting outrage, you know, kind of acknowledging feelings that are complex and hard is important. I think giving tools for you know, working together, solving problems is really important. Letting them lead and being united. You know, I think everything that you talked about, Barb, is spot on.
Thank you, Ava. Anne, last words.
I think it'd be good to teach Chinese at school. I think it used to be, then it got dropped off. I was thinking about all this wonderful technology we have developed for COVID, how sad it is down in Melbourne, and I would warrant that a good number of them will have been in jail, and they get given a lot of medication, including tranquilizers, in jail, and they get highly suspicious about stuff being pumped into them. So I do think that will be part of who they are. And I thought the general strike sounded pretty good, Marty. Thanks.
I want to apologize for going a little bit late, but I just could not resist hearing these wise words from a really, really, really amazing panel. I from the bottom of my heart, and I think I can say from the bottom of 122 hearts, I want to thank this panel for these really wonderful reflections that close out the conference. Thank you for allowing me to be the moderator of such a rich panel. I'd like to now hand it over to Wendy Lambert, who will close things out. Thanks to everyone for your attention.
Thank you so much, everybody. And I don't want to take too long because some of us want to join the happy hour in just under 8 minutes. So I really wanted to acknowledge everybody from the panel like Susan has done. And hopefully it does reflect what the Raising Peace Festival has reflected for me, which is being the diversity and inclusion of voices from many different voices. The richness of the group chat during this final forum has really reinforced those, like what we bring as a community, right, to this festival and how we can carry that forward, hopefully, and in answer to that other question, by looking at ways that, the Raising Peace networking that's been created to really acknowledge the people who've been involved with that. And I won't acknowledge individually right now, but please stay in touch with that. But I would particularly, of course, acknowledge WILF and IPAN and who have I forgotten? Who's the other one? IPV or IVP, sorry, as the core organising bodies. And you'll see different connections in the group chat and connections also to the possibility of donating to the future work coming out of the Raising Peace Festival, and also particularly aid for Afghanistan. But thinking about like, how is that what we're all part of, right? And that diversity inclusion has been partly about having this as a free event, right? So like people could come for free and join any of these sessions, and that most of the people who've been involved have been doing it, all of us have been doing this as volunteers, right? The only money expended was to make sure that the website was technically strong and to support the technical side of things. So I really want to acknowledge also the technical support that we've had during the festival. It's been pretty amazing. And to, close out with those thoughts that have come through from this panel and the whole festival about creating community, about being passionate for change, right? We can be passionate, we can be angry, and yet we can also work together, as Nick was saying at the beginning, coming from that heart of that place of, knowing that peace begins with each of us. That's been a theme that's come out really strongly, and also that it's one step at a time. Yeah. So whether it's that wonderful image we had about it takes only just throwing back one starfish at a time to make a difference to that starfish, to that idea of that from Margaret Mead, that, we know that it's groups of small groups that make a difference, as Marty was talking about, the engagement within action, within localized communities. And basically just that sense that, I think that's all I wanted to say, really, that it's passion for peace, right? And I feel it in this group, the music that's been part of it, the knitting nanas that have been part of it, the activists, the Indigenous voices, the First Nations Day, the having youth organise their own panel session, all of those things that has been really part of that inclusiveness, and hopefully we can move forward with that inspired. That's where I'm going to leave things at the moment. So please stay in touch with the networking if that's what you want to do, and otherwise go make a difference in your world. Thanks, everybody.